Regenerative education. What does it mean and why is it so powerful to focus on educating people who want to learn more about regeneration? Why does our guest of today makes a very strong case against trying to convince the people in power in industry, finance industry, chemical companies, fertilizer companies, large ultra-processed food companies, the UN, universities, etc. He has tried and failed and makes a very strong and good case on focusing on education and unlearning on people that want to learn. That's why he started his own university 15 years ago and started with online education in 98. And is focusing on scaling regeneration in Costa Rica and showing the numbers and data behind it to reach a tipping point. The combination of on-the-ground large-scale regenerative projects with the science and data and the global reach of 4,500 alumni that can replicate it in their context of what is being learned in Costa Rica makes it extremely powerful. Enjoy this wide-ranging conversation around education. This is the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast, Investing as if the planet mattered, where we talk to the pioneers in the regenerative food and agriculture space to learn more on how to put our money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities, and ecosystems while making an appropriate and fair return. Why my focus on soil and regeneration? Because so many of the pressing issues we face today have their roots in how we treat our land and our sea, grow our food, what we eat, where and consume. And it's time that we as investors, big and small, and consumers start paying much more attention to the dirt/soil underneath our feet. To make it easy for fans to support our work, we launched our membership community, and so many of you have joined us as a member. Thank you. If our work created value for you, and if you have the means, and only if you have the means, consider joining us. Find out more on gumroad.com/investing-in-regen-ag. That is gumroad.com/investing-in-regen-ag. Or find the link below. Welcome to another episode. Today with the founder of UCI and leading Costa Rica Regenerativa. Welcome, Eduard.
Thank you, Koen, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you guys today.
And thank you so much for coming on here. First of all, a shout out to Fernando Russo, who made this happen, who speaks very highly of his time. First of all, of your work and also of his time in Costa Rica. So I'm very curious to unpack your story and, of course, what you see from such an important country in this journey, a country that's leading in many ways, still has a lot of challenges, and as everywhere, but definitely an example from many directions. And the education piece that we're going to explore here. But I would love to start with a personal question we always like to ask at the beginning. How come you spend most of your awake hours, and it's early morning for you, so thank you for doing that, focusing on regeneration and soil? What path led you to what you're doing now today? And this can be long answers, which is perfectly fine because we have time.
I had the beautiful privilege of growing up in the jungle. I remember some indigenous people coming to trade spears with BB guns with my father. And all the hurt animals around were brought to us. So I grew up really in contact with nature and walking in the forest. So I've always understood that we are nature. It's not humans and nature's. Humans are nature, and nature is us. So this link, and then of course becoming a father, have two generations of kids, older generation with some grandkids, and younger generation, a 12-year-old son, and having worked for over 45 years in biodiversity, climate change, global change, development, it's just too scary to know that he doesn't get to my age unless we do something. So no matter what happens, I'm going to keep on going and try to build a better place, a future of abundance, a future of possibilities. And we're still on time to do that.
Yeah, what gives you hope in that? I think a lot of people not have lost hope, but if you say followed the news and don't dig deeper into amazing examples, etc., like how do you keep keep hope?
There are a few great people I've come across. Some I've met in person, others I've only read, like Buckminster Fuller said, if you want to change a reality, don't fight it, build a better one that will make the old one obsolete. So I actually spent too many years trying to fight the system. I mean, I've sat on a table with Evo Morales and Lula. I've talked to Congresses, I've talked to presidents, I've talked to ministers. I went to the UN. I was in the Man and the Battery Advisory Committee, the Scientific Advisory Committee. I was a vice chair in one of the IUCN commissions. I was all over the place. And I just got very, very frustrated because I came to the conclusion that the answers won't come from there. The build back better. These phrases just don't work. But what gave me hope is that in spite of all the warnings that nature has given us, we never paid attention. So I think she sent us our last little present. Guys, you're not going to be able to see me. I'm going to put you on your knees for a couple of years. Think it over. And let's talk. And we didn't. But at the same time, she showed how resilient she is. We gave her 4 months vacation. I think one of the positive memories of pandemic is every news outlet showed the nature thriving, exploding in life, every single corner. Even here in Costa Rica, we saw, the Mediterranean with the dolphins, and I could see here all the wildlife moving around. The fish stocks started increasing again. So it's like saying, I'm still here. And even if we've kind of destroyed most of the nature, and I think the blame to this is actually the science. I come from a scientific background. I've worn the white gowns. I've been sitting behind electron microscopes for weeks in a row. So I come from that. But that reductionist science got us into this mess. We forgot to turn knowledge into wisdom. We forgot to understand and be able to look at complexity. And the disciplinary approach got us into rabbit holes. And I see right now the whole system, political, UN, whatever, focus on net zero, focus on reducing carbon emissions. I mean, the legacy carbon in the atmosphere is already way above what it could be. Otherwise, we wouldn't be seeing these huge impacts already. So dreaming of a 1.5, which we already crossed, dreaming of, all these long-term goals, kind of like not positive. Biodiversity loss is so important, and it's not the most relevant in the discussions. And we can see now that already in a country like Costa Rica, famous for its biodiversity, our insect populations are plummeting, our bird populations are plummeting, our amphibian populations are plummeting. The first reported extinction of a frog was here in Costa Rica in 1987. Latin America has lost 94% of the abundance of biodiversity. But again, the reductionist science, the reductionist approach, the disciplinary approach has us focusing on species. So we look at the panda bear. Let's put millions into rescue the panda bear or the polar bear. Very few people remember that we had to scrape the windshield when we went out with the car to get rid of the insects. That's abundance. And that's gone. I've asked many, many newer generations if they ever had to scrape the windshields, and especially the headlights, because of the heat, they get stuck. I remember having to get a Gillette and scraping those off every time you're going out with a car into nature. That's gone. But people are not able to see that. We don't understand it. And the scientists are not able to see that because there's one working on insects, there's one working on the left leg of that rare bird, and we just lost our connection with nature. But you ask me, why do I have hope? I can see how quickly nature comes back. I've been working on regeneration now for about 15 years. And during COVID, I moved to a northern province in Costa Rica called Guanacaste. Most of the tourists know it because that's where they all come. And Guanacaste depended 100% on tourism. And when tourism got locked down, and literally got locked down, they closed the airport, they kicked the tourists out. They didn't even let people go surf. I mean, how ridiculous is that? Out in the ocean alone, and you're caught by the police. The companies that brought food for the restaurants, for the soup, quit coming. And people were not producing any food locally because they depended on tourism. So we came in and started producing regeneratively, initially with family farms. When we got close to 200 family farms, it was logistically impossible to keep on. So we moved to community farms. And then we noticed very quickly with these community farms, and we used methodologies from Cuba, where in the 1989-1990 crisis, when the Russians moved out, they were also left without food. And they learned how to produce food very quickly without using chemicals. And one of the creators of that food security program, Félix Cañet, he retired from Cuba. He's in his 70s, but he's stronger than any bull around. And his wife was Costa Rican, so he moved down, and I hired him. And using his methodologies, we got to produce over 10 tons of food per hectare per month, 35, 36 different crops. So abundant, so much food. I remember this woman where we came in the first time, she was crying, she was holding 3 little kids. They were horrible. Their skin was brown, spotted. And she was crying because she was feeding junk food, something like Doritos, to these kids, because those are the only companies that got there, Coca-Cola and junk food companies. They still went to these local corner stores. And after 2 months, I went to visit, and she called the kids and said, look how their eyes are shining again. That is impactful. That gives you hope. We can recover our chronic diseases just by recovering the soil microbiome, the plant microbiome, and the human microbiome. We can get our health back. But then we started observing, yes, we had a huge increase in insects, a lot of them bad insects. The first few weeks, we used repellents with chile, with garlic, with onion, and so on. But after about 4 months, we had almost 200 species of insect and arthropods coming back. After 6 months, populations started exploding. After a year, the good insects were at 94, 95, 97%. And they controlled the bad insects, the wasps, the ladybugs, and we put in flowers to attract these, and so we use nature, and we use nature's system, nature's wisdom, I could say, and imitated her and got huge production. And we didn't even have to use the repellents anymore because it turned it into a living ecosystem. So when I hear that we cannot save the world, and FAO scientists, universities around the world are saying we cannot feed a global growing population that's going to get to 12 billion, I don't know where they're getting that dream, because we're actually going to collapse before that if we keep on doing what we're doing. We can feed the world, but it has to be smaller scale. It has to be local. I don't want a product. And I see another thing we spotted, and with this 20-fold increase in insect population, of course, the birds and the bats started increasing, coming back to that place. So we're actually measuring bats, measuring birds, measuring butterflies to see how we can actually establish baselines and see how quickly biodiversity comes back. And in the tropics, it's amazing. I'm not saying you can do this up in the Arctic, but in the tropics, it's amazing. So I know life will come back. But at the same time, the quality of the food, the nutrient density of regenerative food I mean, forget organic. This is really quality stuff. Even the other day, I took these people to a regenerative farm and these news people, and I had them try the mustard, and they started crying. It was like putting a ball of wasabi into your mouth. You do not get that with mustard that's being harvested, sent into the central distribution area, and coming back to you 2 or 3 weeks later. We brought cooks in to help these people cook the bitter stuff because they didn't eat bitter stuff before. But they had a Christmas party and they said, Edward, we have learned to eat the bitter stuff because that fixes our health. So we brought cooks in, taught them how to cook the bitter stuff and eat it. But just the whole holistic view of a healthy community, healthy soil, healthy plants, there is no better hope, even for young people, to say we're still on time to build the future we want. Nature's still here to cooperate. We do not have to build back better. We do not have to adapt to climate change. And this is me personally. I mean, go ahead, all the people who are working on climate change adaptation, keep on going. I don't care. But I know instead of sitting down and waiting to learn how to live in a collapsing planet, I am going to still put all my energy into making this planet work. And do it. We can do large scale. We're starting with large scale projects right now to demonstrate if I'm correct, and I think I'm almost correct, because the evidence we have now after 3-4 years of research will show that with a cattle project that we're developing, 30,000 hectares, where I'm giving back a third of the land for biological corridors because I'm increasing the income for the farmers. I'm capturing carbon in farmland, not in the forest. And if we get 200,000 hectares, which we have planned for the next 5 years, depending on the resources we get to support this, I'll be capturing 25% of Costa Rica's carbon footprint by cattle alone. So the decarbonization strategy of this country is based on electric mobility. I drive an electric car because I like to drive an electric car, not because I have any clue of what I'm doing good for the planet by driving an electric car. It's not a solution. But by turning cattle into holistic grazing, we can capture probably around 10, maybe even more tons per hectare per year. Giving back 30% of the land for water harvest, biological corridors, will bring life explosively back and allow for insects to come back, allow for the birds to keep recovering their populations, the bats. Half of our mammals in Costa Rica are bats. Yesterday, we were measuring bats. It's just nature showing us it can. So why should I not bet on this? That's the only bet I have. I have no other bet.
Thank you, first of all, so much. That was probably the best intro we've had in a long time, and I was reluctant to interrupt because it's just so good. And it sounds like this experience in COVID, in the pandemic, really shook you, or somehow, because you said I worked so long in international development in climate, and then this pandemic came. Like, how was that experience to be forced to see, because you moved to a northern area where there was suddenly no tourism and food needed to be grown? Like, was it a conscious switch? Like, how did you hired this retired but not really retired guy? Like, how did you decide, okay, I need to work on local regenerative food? Maybe you were already working on it before, but how did that accelerate that process? If no, in a potentially dying planet, I'm going to fix this piece, see what happens, see the explosion of abundance, and we'll deal with it, with the rest from there.
Actually, COVID, what it did was accelerate resources, because a very good friend who founded one of the most important tech companies in the world retired, moved out of his company, was here with 2 little kids, and he wanted to save his town from the pandemic, keep it still livable. So he put the money in. The difference was having the resources. which would not have come unless there was this emergency. But I started working with systems back in 1980 and looking at farming through the systems lens, understanding Odum and other biologists, ecologists, how nature didn't have garbage, it didn't have waste. What was a byproduct of one component was food for the next component. So I moved into that space very early on in my career. I studied veterinary medicine in Brazil, but then I did my master's in Turrialba and got here in Costa Rica. And I managed to become friends with one of the most influential persons in my life who died very early. But he was a system thinker, a brilliant system thinker, and got me involved. So I've been working with systems all my life. And that's the reason why I founded my own university 30 years ago, because I wanted a university that could focus on systems, a university that could understand complexity. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy finding teachers that were willing to work in complexity. It wasn't easy finding teachers that were willing to unlearn. That was the most difficult thing.
Probably that's the most difficult one. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I studied with so-and-so in this great university, this is what we're taught. And I said, I don't know who in the hell thought it would be a good idea to spray food with poison when you're going to eat it. I mean, you have to be dementious or just thinking on money. There is no way a scientist with soul could think of doing that. I don't see that. So
I'm always curious what they eat at home, especially like the most vocal. We have some of these on LinkedIn that are super vocal on the absolutely essential piece of chemicals and otherwise we cannot feed the world and blah, 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 blah. And we all know, it's still a very strong narrative, and I see it with investors. We know if you look at the data, it's not true. The abundance you can create, not saying it's easy, is definitely there. But I would always like to see, look in their kitchen cupboard. What are they cooking and feeding themselves? If they are completely convinced glyphosate is okay, if they're I remember yourself and your children. That would.
I remember that interview with the CEO of Monsanto when they gave him a glass of water and said it has glyphosate, and since glyphosate is not poison, please drink it. And he refused. And glyphosate, if you read the label, it says it does not produce chronic disease, it is not acute poison. Okay, they never say anything about chronic. And the problem with pesticides, with chemicals, with fertilizers, is all the PhD students and master students that do this research are for 1 or 2 or 3 years there. Never a long-term study has done. And there's nothing worse than killing the soil. By tilling it, you're breaking up the mycelium. By poisoning it with fertilizer, you get all the nitrifying bacteria disappear because there's too much nitrogen feedback. You add phosphor and it gets trapped by the soil. Whereas if you go back to nature, the mycelium dissolves the phosphor that has been fertilized for years and dissolves other minerals from the rock. Mycelium turned Mars into Earth through the millions of years. Mycelium was the one that was responsible in the Great Plains in the US and in Central Africa, with 95 million bison walking in the US with wolves, to bring very rich soil, turning it into carbon-rich soil for thousands and thousands of years. We destroyed that with science, by plowing and by putting chemicals and by doing soil analysis to see what is missing in the soil. The mycelium takes care of replenishing what is missing in the soil. And it's just following nature, and we don't need any chemicals. That's what I'm doing today, is demonstrating that we don't need it and showing it in numbers. But going back to your question, I've been involved at the Convention on Biological Diversity. I've been a national negotiator for Costa Rica at the convention. As I mentioned, I was in all these different positions. And I think my biggest tipping point was, going up to New York for SDG 17 And the person who was coordinating started every single 2-hour session by thanking Monsanto, Syngenta, Nestlé, Coca-Cola for the tremendous and invaluable support. And you look at SDG 17, and I'm not sure if the finger was pointing exactly at the wrong things. And I was brought into Miami by Spanish CNN for an interview the day the SDGs were being approved. Actually, when I got on the channel, Evo Morales was giving his talk at the UN. And what I ended up saying in summary was, you know the Laudato Si from Pope Francis?
Yes, I read it.
It's a better document than the SDGs. Because he gives actually the correct dimension of things and the way to move forward. And I'm not Catholic. So you take the language away from Laudato Si, and
It's very
you
strong.
actually,
Yeah.
it's a very powerful document that was put down by the system because it was published before the system. That should have been the base document for the SDGs, taking away all the religious things and the dogmas and everything you can blame on religion. But so I was so brought down, and especially because, for example, for 2010, the Nagoya meeting from the COP 10, where after 10 years, we had not gone to zero loss of biodiversity, which was a global promise by 2010. We worked hard to get the Aichi targets approved. We worked hard to get the strategic framework for biodiversity approved. It was so much work. That year, I traveled 302 days, out of my own pocket, most of it. And then just seeing how we kicked the bucket forward another 10 years. And in 2020, the reports just showed that implementation was nothing. We were still dying. So am I going to stick to that world?
No,
So-
but then how do you respond to people that say, like, I've also seen people draw that conclusion, not saying you did, and say, okay, I'm just going to I'm going to focus on my own quote unquote piece of paradise, and then we'll see what happened. Like, how do you connect the, not small, but the local, how do we make sure that that narrative of abundance and the narrative of we're part of nature and the narrative of this makes way more sense with nature than in any other way? How does that narrative break into the walls of the UN or into the walls of Wall Street? Or do we even want that is a second? But like, how do we, like, where are those, I'm always curious, where are those tipping points in people in power and also financial power? Like I've seen people work on farms and suddenly not see the light, but suddenly be like, oh, what I thought, etc. Like those light bulb moments or those tipping points are amazing when they happen, but it would be nice if they happen slightly faster, let's say. So how do we bring that abundance experience you had to more?
Okay, when I decided to resign to my great position when I was 35 years old at a national university, working with or for the German government, very good salary, a month vacation every year, all these benefits, I decided to resign and start my own university. I knew I needed a university to change the world. I knew we couldn't stay with pilot projects. Okay. So when I decided that sustainability was gone, that opportunity, the train left the station, we were not on that train. We needed something else. And I've been working with biosphere reserves, the UNESCO Man in the Biosphere program, for now 30 plus years, which is a bioregional approach where you have governance, local governance, and you have conservation development and living together, and you have science and education. So based on that, I developed my own framework for regeneration, which is a toroid, where at the base of the toroid is Mother Nature. At the other side of the toroid is spirituality. And when I used to talk about spirituality 25 years ago with other presidents of universities, they looked at me like, what does this guy smoke this morning? Okay. And I think that's our biggest mistake in academia, that we left the spiritual dimension, the quantum space, the deep consciousness, the capacity of the human soul, brain, mind, whatever you want to call it, to go beyond. That is left out of science because it's fiction. So then we have regenerative economics, and I've had the privilege of working with the best people, John Fullerton, Kate Rayworth, Christian Felber, regenerative societies where we actually empower communities to make their own decisions, to plan their future, to work on their future, to build their future. You cannot do it with without regenerative culture, because culture is the glue that holds us together. For many people in the North, culture is just theater, arts, music. For us, it's the glue that holds our communities together. It gives us identity, gives us pride. It gives us a reason for continuing forward as a community, as a group. We're not looking at the individual person right now. And then we have regenerative politics. Regenerative politics, I wish I could have young women moving all the white-haired and yellow-haired men out of business. We need empathy. We need thinking about the bigger, the common, and not the ego. Men tend to think of the ego. So we can change the political system to a true democracy and move away from all this AI manipulation of voting and so on. We're in the wrong path there. So that can be done with local governance and in spite of central government. So going back to your question, as an academic, I said, I'm not going to fall into the trap of the academics, of publishing a beautiful book, getting well known, getting invited to speak all over the world without having a clue of how to put it into practice. So in 2018, I started with Costa Rica Regenerativa. So it's a country scale initiative in spite of government to show that regeneration can happen. And I just need now to keep on scaling it. So as I said, cattle, we have 1.3 million hectares of cattle. I am working now this project through replanet.org in the UK with funding out of France. It's the carbon tunnel vision, carbon funding, but we're bringing in biodiversity and we're bringing in the human aspect. So we can do this project, initially 30,000 hectares. I'm sure the moment farmers are going to start making more money, are going to see the difference in their farms. This area, when I was a kid, most of the rivers were flowing all year round. Now they're dry for 7 months a year. I'm totally convinced that if we scale it up, we'll have the rivers flowing all year round. And we have a spot, Ojancha, where we worked back in 1996, 1997. It's a community-led program. We did not lead it. We just supported some things. They now have a river flowing. They have a forest. They have nature back. So I know it can be done. So by the time we get this, I'm sure we can export everything out. And the way to export this out is by education. And that's where my university backs us up. I've heard people, asking me, what's the secret? And the secret is the teamwork, a beautiful team. Being accused of collecting people.
So how big is the university? What should we imagine? We're in an audio medium, of course.
We're small. We're 50 people.
50, okay.
Yeah. But I transitioned to online in 1998.
Wow.
So we've had students now in over 60 countries. All our programs have been innovative. And we launched the first certificate in regenerative entrepreneurship 6 years ago. And every single student that has gone through that has changed their life. Every single one, from 22-year-olds to 60-year-olds. The 60-year-old was a businessman. He had tourism companies. He sold everything off. He sold his hotels, and he put up a foundation to work with regenerative tourism at the community level. A girl who was doing a banking career in Sydney quit and set up an organization to help place kids into regenerative jobs. Now, the way to scale this at the global is what I'm working on now. We need a global platform for education. And the trick I found is based on this certificate, which is now in the 6th cohort, which is absolutely fantastic. I wrote 30 emails to people I knew. Some I didn't know too well at the time, but I thought I'd get maybe 5 responses, inviting them to be lecturers in this program. I'm talking about Alan Savory. I'm talking about Kate Rayworth. I'm talking about John Fullerton. I'm talking about Stuart Cohen from Buckminster Fuller Institute. I'm talking about Ben Haggard, Carol Sanford.
Let's say, yeah. Very,
very heavy players. We ended up with 57 speakers.
Wow.
So what I'm setting up now is a platform where all of these people can set up their courses. They're not going to be synchronous, so it's off. I mean, you can do it whenever you want at the pace you want. So young people don't want a fixed curriculum anymore. They want a flexible learning pathway. So I'm going to have, I hope by next year, we hope to be launching January, February. I'm still missing some resources, important resources to get the whole thing running. But I'm working on that. If we have 150 courses from tourism to public policy to agriculture to environmental aspects, and students can then go and say, oh, okay, the system will recommend you first start with a biomimicry course. So you learn how nature functions. Then do Eduard's course. He'll talk about planetary boundaries. He'll talk about the deep concepts of complexity. And then you can do this course on regenerative tourism 1, and then regenerative tourism. You didn't like it, you can move to cultural innovation and regeneration. And then you can do a business course, but you can do your own learning pathway. And we'll have certifications at the end, certificates. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars. A student clicks on one of the courses, he has to pay. We want to do low cost, so we need large numbers. But the moment he clicks, the person who's setting up the course, or who set up the course, will get 40% of the payment right away. So, 1, I have a global group of the best teachers in the world without being on my payroll, but they're getting paid right away. Then I have a network of mentors around the world who help students with their practical programs and their projects. And third, a layer of bioregions. So we launched also in 2018 with John Fullerton, with Stuart, the Regenerative Communities Network. And this is a network of bioregions that are doing regeneration. And we also have the Biosphere Reserve Network. We have other bioregional approaches, eco-villages and so on. If we can bring these together all into a cooperative network, and then we have a global network of students studying with the best teachers in the world, with mentors across the continents, and with bioregions where students can then go and click on the planet and say, oh, wow,
visit and
I'm going to go and visit. I'm going to go and do my project. And one of the dream projects we had, and we launched this with Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising for the COP in Glasgow, and we did not get $1 single of support. We were setting up a fund to fund the students' projects. I have a graduate now in Ghana who's turning his village into a food forest with the kids that don't have school, that don't have employment. This is hope for these kids. Let's turn our village, which is dry, has no water, has no shade, it's hot, into a food forest where we can feed everybody, bring down the temperatures, harvest water, and create livelihoods for all the kids involved. This person would probably do well with $15,000 to accelerate the process. We need to support this type of investment. And it will bring back so much in terms of planetary change. If we get these startups all over the world, imagine the example they set for their neighboring villages. It's just going to go wild. So that's how I have faith. I'm not working on small pilot projects. I'm actually educating that regeneration is possible. It is financially viable. And so it's good business, and it's good for our health. It's good for the planet's health. It's putting life at the center. And that's my definition of regeneration, putting life at the center. We need to bring humanity in service of life, all life, not only our life.
And how does a physical university fit into this? Like, what's the how important is the university in Costa Rica, or is that, I'm not saying not replaced by, is that not also even overshadowed? But let's say that the bigger impact is the online piece, because you've been very early with that. How do those two relate?
I think the key to this is we're not teaching online. We're helping learn online. It's a different paradigm. 2, we're not using textbooks to teach. Yes, we do have textbooks. Yes, the students need to read textbooks. But a lot of it is out of experience and demonstration and having done the things. So I do not have permanent teachers that are sitting on academic desks. I have CEOs. I have experts around the planet serving as teachers because they like to teach. But I don't have any teachers sitting 12 hours a day in their office, reading books and teaching what's in the books. So these are real life experiences. Felix, when he teaches a course, it's different because we went to El Salvador way before COVID. A group of women that was damaged by the large killing of people back 30 years ago. There were a few survivors, and then this generated a whole impact in these villages that were killed because of land grab by the industrial coffee growers and so on. So these communities never really recovered. And Felix was asked by a woman who was donating the money from her daughter, which had died, to do this. He went in and asked the ladies, "Oh, I see what you eat is pupusas." That's a Salvadorian type of tortilla filled with stuff. And they said, "Yeah, pupusas are our main dish." "Okay, let's prepare a pupusa." So he sat there with them preparing the pupusa. And so he said, "Okay, let's grow every ingredient your pupusa needs." And that's where he started the home gardens with these women, for them to grow all the ingredients for the pupusas. Can you imagine the impact of that? Because they immediately saw the benefit of planting their own food and planting their ingredients for the pupusa. First, they didn't have to buy it from outsiders. And second, they could control the quality and avoid all the chemicals and pesticides and GMOs and stuff like that. So it had an immediate impact. And these women immediately took up, it was a course, it was planned for 2 weeks. After 4 or 5 days, Felix called me up and says, "They're ready. I can go back." And I said, "No, just stay with them for the rest because, And then they came over here to look at more projects. This is a type of impact that when you tell a student this story, it's immediately a different focus. It's not learning and memorizing for an exam. It's understanding what life means and how through learning, we can change the world. We can change our life. We can change our company. And yes, we've been accused of many things. One of the biggest banks here, the human resources person was a graduate of ours. And she called me a few years ago and she said, "Eduard, if you keep on putting all this BS in the brains of your graduates, our bank is not going to send you any more students." And I said, "Why is that?" "They're criticizing our corporate responsibility program." And I said, "Yeah, in what way?" "They're saying it's greenwash." And I asked her, "Is it greenwash?" And she couldn't answer. And I was really proud of my graduates. But yeah, there's a pushback. These people, they declared carbon neutrality. And the only way they could do it was by moving their jets off the bank to a separate corporation and then renting the company to fly their own jets so that carbon footprint wouldn't go into the bank footprint. And one of the students brought that up in a document. And of course the bank didn't like it. But I was proud. So yes, we do have pushbacks. But I'm sure this is we have over 5,500 graduates. I have some that created ministries of environment. I have others that have transitioned their companies. It's just amazing the feedback you get from real conscious learning processes. I mean, we launched the first master's program in sustainable tourism management in 1997. People didn't know what sustainability was, even less sustainable tourism. We coined the term regenerative tourism, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years ago. Now you Google it, it's all over the place. But we don't stay on the definition. I mean, regenerative tourism is about local development. It's about experiencing. It's moving away from interpretation, which is beautiful. Ecotourism, you go with a guide and he tells you the sloth comes down to take its poop every 3 days and then it goes back up into the tree. Beautiful. What did I learn with that? Yeah, nice. But regenerative tourism is about interaction. So you go and you learn from the community. You live with the community and the community has benefits. You eat the local. I mean, the restaurants are buying from the neighbors. So the neighbors are included into the economy. Local development is about reducing the gap. And Costa Rica has been increasing its Gini coefficient. We're moving away from equality. I grew up in a country with 80% middle class. Today, that middle class is disappearing. And we're being gentrified by the invasion of billionaires and millionaires coming to buy up all the land. And that is taking people out of their homes. So yes, we have huge challenges, but if we can activate this, and I see the efforts in one of the technical schools. We went to this area which actually regenerated. It's actually the area that still produces some vegetables in this part of the country, but they were all chemical agriculturists. Everything was chemical. They came from the Central Valley. And we couldn't change their habits. So we went to the technical school where their kids studied, and we taught regenerative agriculture there. And we asked them, ask your parents for a piece of land. They did. Some got 20 square meters, some got 1,000 square meters. But the moment the parents saw that they were producing better without spending 40% of their income buying stuff from outside, poison from outside, they started saying, hey, you want to extend your area? Let's do an experiment. You know, that's the way you shift things, by showing, by demonstrating, not by talking about it. And most of the academic institutions, universities, and so on, are still fixed in curriculum that are not viable, not fit for purpose anymore, with AI changing the way everything works exponentially, with planetary collapse being exponentially, with climate change being exponential. We cannot waste 10 or 15 years to design a new curriculum. So either we wake up to the reality and we start being very flexible, and I have to go here against what the Ministry of Education says. If I submit a program and they take 2 years to analyze it and approve it, it's gone. I mean, the opportunity is gone. We need to have very flexible programs where the kids, the students, actually are part of developing their own curriculum, their own experiences, co-creating solutions across the planet at bioregional level. That's where I think we can change the planet. And that's where we're heading to.
And why now? I think that's always an interesting question. Investors or people in general, like entrepreneurs before starting, a lot of this knowledge, I think, has been known or is known for in a lot of different circles for a long time, maybe not it's regenerative, etc. But what makes it different now, apart from that we're in complete planetary collapse? But so the necessity is there, but that doesn't mean we're doing anything. So why do you think it seems to be not happening now, but the interest for this kind of education, interest for regeneration, the interest for the narrative of being part of nature. Like we see it with the podcast 8 years ago. The last few years have been very different from 8 years ago, I can tell you, in terms of simple interest, in terms of if I talk to investors or people that are managing wealth, like even the narrative that soil is important wasn't there 13 years ago when I started following this space, actually through grazing. And now, of course, within a bubble, but let's say that has sort of seems to have shifted. But I don't want to fall into the trap saying, oh, now everything is different. This will be different than 20, 30 years ago, than 100 years ago when the organic movement came up. Like that's dangerous as well, I feel. What's your feeling there? Is it different now? Are we on a moment?
It is different.
Change? Will we look back to it?
Yeah, it is different. I've been giving conferences in the first 40 years. It was face to face. I do 80 conferences in 25 countries a year. My carbon footprint was huge. I did manage to save several hundred thousands of hectares of forest, so I had my footprint well compensated. Maybe 20 years ago, what I managed to get was people crying in the audience. And I said, okay.
It's not a bad response necessarily. It's a response.
It's not a bad response, and that means they were moved. I taught universities in many different countries, and I always ask them, and who wants to be a politician? And none of them, maybe one of them, raised their hand. And over the last years, the space has changed. People are interested. People are wanting to. Youth is already recognizing that the way it's going, they're not happy and they don't have hope. What I did learn, and actually my wife helped me a lot in this, because I worked for some time with Al Gore, even as one of those climate change speakers. And she said, start with hope. Start by giving the good news. Nobody wants to hear any more of the bad news.
And we hear a lot of it. We don't hear a lot of
stuff. And I think people by now are convinced, and the ones that are not convinced is because of dogma or religion or whatever. My brother-in-law has a beautiful program called Curiosamente in Mexico. Millions of kids listen to it. It's about science, communicating science. He was shut down on Facebook by people that believe that the world is flat. And they complained to Facebook, and Facebook took his channel down. So can you believe in Mexico, a group of people that think the earth is flat, and Facebook complying by shutting down his channel? We still have these people. But then, do I waste time with them? No, they're obsolete already. Bucky Fuller, just ignore them. They will fall into their place, and they are already falling. And I think that's where the system is reacting now. I see like a drowning person. If somebody goes to save them and doesn't know it, he'll get drowned because that person will try to pull him down to save herself. So this is what the system, the establishment, whatever you want to call it, is feeling. It's losing its fit for purpose, and it's dying. And my good friend Kate Raworth says, we need to help them die. We need to help them go in peace. And they're going to go in peace. Okay.
How do we do that? How do we work with the existing system to ignore? Because that's not what you're saying. You're saying help them die. How do we do hospice care?
I don't think I have the ability to do it, nor the energy.
If you had, how would you do it? If you had the energy in a parallel universe, and you're like, how do we do that with respect? Because
I'd give them alternatives. I'd give them alternatives. Of course, a company like Monsanto has no alternative. A company like Coca-Cola has no alternative. They know they're selling poison. they're killing young people with diabetes. I mean, I think it's 3 out of every 8 people in Honduras have diabetes since early age. And it's because they drink Coca-Cola every single day. So these are companies that don't have, I mean, other companies that, produce baby food and 100% are contaminated with glyphosate. These companies should be closed. But they're companies that are doing an effort. And I think we just need to provide them with the evidence on how to do it differently. I don't think people are mean just for being mean. And another thing which has worked, and I learned a lot from Alan Savory. A lot of people know about Alan Savory because of his cattle and defending the cow. But Alan Savory is a real holistic thinker. He was a politician, and he was president of the opposing party in a country in Africa. And he managed to get to a peace agreement for 3 years because he moved people to think forward. So if you ask anybody, no matter if they're red or blue, to describe what they dream of in 20, 30 years, it's not very different, independent of your religion, of your political tendencies. Okay? So
Start with a dream and work.
we actually forget our current challenges through that. And we can concentrate on the real issues. So that's one of the things I would do. I would get them to think as people, not as a CEO of a cold company, but as people that have kids, as people that have a life. How would you like to be living in 20 years? And that's a question I ask in every one of my presentations. How do you expect to be living in 20 years? And a lot of this is coming just across the room, no matter who's sitting in the room. So we work towards that and say, how do we get to it? Is it by poisoning life? No. Is it by enhancing conditions for life? Yes. Okay, let's see how your company can now move to enhance conditions for life. So yes, there are companies that will fall out and we cannot deal with everybody, but there are a lot of companies that can do the transition and we're seeing it. So I would say that is the best way to move people forward. The most difficult part, as I said at the beginning, is unlearning. So a lot will reject the information just because it will make them uncomfortable coming out of the comfort zone, which they learned from a blessed expert PhD from this university. But again, if we move into the future and start analyzing and using nature's wisdom, we need to learn how to learn from nature. And with all this movement, going back to your original question in this part, you can see on YouTube today, people like Zach Bush. I don't know if you know him. Look him up.
We had him on the show, and at Groundswell last year, I was lucky enough to host a session with Ann Bickley, who wrote with David Montgomery the book on What Your Food Ate, and with Zach, which was a true gift.
Yeah, and these people are now popular. So that means that people are listening to alternatives. Why should I get Alzheimer if I can correct myself by eating good? Do we need a company that produces yogurt to put 30 ingredients in it for money? No, we don't. A yogurt has to be bacteria and milk. So we don't need the pink and the red colorings, which are producing cancer in kids. We don't need the starch and the corn syrup. We don't need all that crap. So if we educate the people, and this is another way to convince corporations, by educating the people. If people, and my wife and I read all the labels, and I hardly ever go with my wife to the supermarket, but she'll take 2 hours, because she'll read every single label and not buy the stuff that's going to poison my kid. If we get that level of consciousness, companies will not produce food with titanium dioxide in it as all the M&Ms have, or the orange juices have titanium dioxide. For Pete's sakes, who is going to buy titanium dioxide or go to any of these other cookies? And they're poison. So people are conscious of that. And we have a lot of people listening to Zach Bush and all the other ones around the world talking about this. We will make companies change. Yes, they might reduce their gain by 0.1% if they don't put starch into their yogurt. But the benefit for people will make them better clients.
Are you sure? I mean, we've seen such an explosion of the ultra processed food, and we're gonna hopefully have Chris on, Chris von Tulik, who wrote Ultra Processed People, which of course based on research from Brazil and in the US, but really became a hype in terms of book, at least in the UK and some other places. But there, the argument is very strong. Like, where this is like hard drugs. This is so addictive. We cannot expect the companies to. We cannot expect us to not eat that anymore because it's just too cheap and too good in terms of snack. Keep on eating because it's designed to just be super addictive. And he calls very strongly for regulation. You're saying consciousness will lead us to check the label and say, oh my God, I don't want 35 ingredients in a yogurt. And that's not an exaggeration. Like, people, please do check, because I see like, oh yeah, but this sandwich, you'll be shocked what's in your sandwich in a so-called healthy food chain. How do the two super strong forces, of course, more consciousness will help reduce that, or will, let's say, increase the label watching, but there are whole companies specifically designed to make us addicted to the stuff, and they're really good at it, as we are as society. And I don't, yeah, what do you see there? It seems like we're having a moment around ultra processed food, by the way, luckily, finally. But we also have known that for a while, and it's like so strong.
Yeah, again, you asked me what I would do if I could. I'm not interested in working on that dimension because it's wasting my time again. I wasted enough time discussing with scientists. I resigned from the Scientific Commission for Climate Change appointed by the previous president because the decarbonization strategy of Costa Rica was going to be electric mobility. And I tried to organize at the pre-COP in 2019 a side event. I organized a side event on soil carbon. And my other 9 scientific partners in this committee said, we don't have enough evidence that soil is relevant for fighting climate change. Okay, I'm out.
Okay, very clearly, don't waste time. Yeah, that's the...
I'm not going to waste time. These are PhDs sitting on a microscope all day long in the most renowned university in the country. I am not going to waste my time because I won't convince them. Now, what we need to do is cross a chasm, 13%. If I can get to 13%, and I could give a fair guess that we're at between 4 and 6% right now of people already in the process of changing.
So we're not talking 30, it's 1-3. So we're starting to get in reach. We double again and we're there.
We're there. And once we get into that chasm, it's going to go. And these companies that 13, put 23, 30 products
in. They don't study systems change. Why 13 is 13% so important?
Well, that's science. I'm not against science. So statistically, there's this chasm where you have the early adopters and you start moving forward. And it gets to a point where people just adopt it. It could be more exponential if we get somebody like, I don't know, I'm out of date with the names of these singers, but yeah. Well, any of these, which, I mean, I remember when I was working in IUCN and we got a video out and we were so happy we had 100,000 hits. And this was the first time that a conservation video had 100,000 hits. And somebody in the audience in this meeting said, I can't remember, it was Britney Spears or who brought out, and she had 2 million hits in 30 minutes. And we had 100,000 in 1 month. Okay, if we can get any of these, Taylor Swift, who's already a bit there, and these other actress, I can't remember her name right now, who's working on this. We get any of these to join us and communicate. I wish I talked with some of the advisors of Greta Thunberg, and I told them, let's get Greta to give solutions so she can stop pointing fingers. If we could have done that, she'd be in a different place today. Imagine a person like Greta telling all kids her age, look, let's stop complying to this corrupt system, to these corrupt companies, to these corrupt governments, and let's build our own. We still have a chance to build a future. Let's do it this way. Stop buying these products, start growing your own food. If you cannot support the neighbor that can grow your own food, let's do co-ops, let's move forward. If she could have given these recommendations, she would have made a huge difference. But pointing fingers to blame won't get you anywhere. The same as discussion with dogma. I mean, there's so much mix of religion with all this lack of capacity to think broader. It's not worth fighting. It's too much energy.
And so what would you tell the financial world? I mean, you're getting them visiting you for sure, people that are investing their own wealth, people that are in positions of wealth where they decide investments are going left or right, or at least they are nudging, let's say. Let's say we do this in the financial heart of Costa Rica or in at Wall Street, etc. In a theater, we get people very inspired, very excited in front of a live audience. But of course, people forget. And if you want one thing, like one seed to plant, and they would get to work the next day. So not just, oh, I'm super inspired in my private life. No, actually, how do you use your capacity, your awake hours in work? What would be that seed you would like to plant? What would be your message for the financial world from what you've seen, what you've experienced, what you've learned?
I've dealt with a lot of potential donors, philanthropists, over the last years and months. It's very hard for this work to be done if they are looking for immediate returns. It takes time. And especially for university, we survived COVID, maybe because we were already online, but we did suffer a lot. 70% of our students who are Latin Americans quit paying because they lost their jobs and so on. I mortgaged the building to keep the university running. We lost only 27 students out of 600 and some during COVID. And then we go into this gentrification process in the country where there's so much dollars being put in from these people buying everything from outside, that the dollar went from 700 colones to less than 500 colones, and our income did the same. So we're right now in a really difficult spot financially, and I have not been able to convince investors to help train thousands of people who can actually save their kids' lives. And save their companies in the future. Because we need to revert the process of planetary collapse. So money in return at the short term is not that easy to get. Yes, we found mechanisms like the cattle producers. We can double their income so they can pay. But the biological quarters, who's going to pay for that? And it's the only insurance for life in the future, bringing biodiversity back to its levels. But that phase of recognizing the importance of life and their own life, because they feel protected in their world. But that's not the case. Even in Costa Rica,
we're say yesterday, like the only thing family offices or investors in general cannot hedge against is societal or ecological collapse. And but it hasn't landed enough, I think, with people. Like without this is the base. Like there's nothing else matters if ecology doesn't, if biodiversity doesn't flourish and ecology doesn't flourish. But that hasn't landed enough yet.
And you can look at it as a temporary investment. I mean, if I had enough funding for the next 10 years and I could demonstrate that we can reverse climate change, we can reverse biodiversity collapse, we can get rid of all fertilizers, we can start reverting Alzheimer, autism, and all these chronic diseases. We can bring life conditions back. We can flourish. After that, I'm sure we can make a business model out of it. But at the beginning, it's almost impossible. So we need long-term investments. We need to look at this as the biggest return is bringing life back. What does that mean to me? What does it mean to me that my kids have actually an opportunity to live in the future? Is that important? These are questions that have to be answered by these people. Or the other question, is your money going to save you? Is all those zeros behind the numbers in your bank account going to assure you're against planetary collapse? Is it going to make you live better? Are you going to be able to enjoy your beachfront house when the sea level is 5 meters above? Are you going to enjoy your life when all food is produced in a lab and you have no microbiome gut left, you have no immune system left? I mean, we're talking about building great conditions for life, every type of life, including these business people.
And
I don't have the arguments, but I've not been successful. Everybody's saying, yeah, we want to help, but, or they take for ages processing data and looking at numbers and seeing my cash flow. This is not about cash flow. I mean, I decided not to be rich when I was less than 20 years old and devote my life to making other people capable of doing things. I'm not in this for money. So it's hard for people to understand when you're not in this for money. And they don't understand the real reasons behind it, which is I have a son who's 12 years old. He won't get to half my age unless I change the conditions. Isn't that scary? Just look at what happened this week in Switzerland, in Italy, in the US, in Mexico, around the world. Cities in the Alps that had waterfalls going above their buildings. I mean, we are there. How much money is required to rebuild these places? If that money could be invested in bringing the conditions for the planet back. We have too much carbon in the atmosphere. Let's pull it down and put it beneath our feet. We can do that with cattle. We can do that with agriculture. We can bring 150% of the carbon emissions of today's economy every year into the soil just by producing food in a different way, in fiber. So the fashion companies can also be part of this. We can do it, but we need to demonstrate it. So we need the measurement, verification, and reporting, the MRV, for these companies, not for the farmer. I brought an indigenous wisdom holder in agriculture, Mel Landers, to work with my team. We're now mixing the Cuban system with indigenous agriculture to actually be able to allow the farmer not to bring anything from outside his farm and produce abundant food. And he always says, a farmer needs permaculture without the yoga.
That's a really good statement, actually. Some people can also use the yoga probably, but let's not make
I agree.
Of the
I agree, but we're talking about farmers that have to put food on their plate and not their kids don't eat that day.
No. You cannot argue if you're in the red. You cannot, like, there's no argument there. So if we switch the conversation and you are an investor, let's say $1 billion US dollars or whatever, better dollars in your case, what would you do? What would you focus on? This could be very long term, but it has to be invested. I'm not asking for dollar amounts. I'm asking for big buckets. Like, what would be prioritization for someone like you that has seen so much, has done so much? and would be in a position of an investor to put money to work, which is not always a good thing. Like, actually, it could be quite a burden, but I still want to ask the question.
So in 2017, an article was published which said that agriculture, or the way we produce our food and fiber, is responsible for about 80% of planetary collapse, the planetary boundaries being exceeded. So agriculture is a low-hanging fruit. If it's the fault for obesity, it's a fault for diseases, it's a fault for biodiversity loss, for water contamination, for deterioration of soil and land and landscapes, it's the lowest hanging fruit to tackle to revert the damage. So what we need is large scale implementation of regenerative agriculture and cattle. If I can get to 10 million hectares measured with, we are developing sensors through the Soil Information Company that can measure soil metabolism. So we don't have to do the soil sampling and send it out. We can actually measure real time the soil. And these should be in the soil, these sensors, by sometime later this year. We can get measuring the biodiversity, how it's returning. We can show that this is successful without having to worry about writing grants every 3 months to keep on the funding process. And we couple it with an educational system that shows this to thousands and thousands and thousands of people around the world, farmers, students, professionals that want to change, and they can start applying it and have a network where exchanges can happen, where we can bring in visiting students from Indonesia, and we can send students to Norway and farmers, and have farms that are demonstrating this in real time. I work here with Rancho Margot. There's actually a documentary, Dying Earth, from Al Jazeera. It just came out a few weeks ago. Rancho Margot is portrayed there.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a place where tourists come because they want to see what changed their kids' lives. So students come in with their groups from universities or colleges, and they go back home as different people. And the parents get curious, what changed the life of my kids?
Who did I send?
What
there?
experience?
Someone else came back. Yeah.
I want to go visit. That's how he gets his tourists. That is the impact we need. And it just will grow and grow exponentially. We can get 100 Rancho Margots around the world working and networked with educational platforms, networked with all these geniuses in regeneration, teaching directly. So we don't have to read their books only. We can actually ask them questions. That's the way to change it massively. Give me 10 years. And then these new businesses will come up. New opportunities will come up.
So the combination of real implementation, observation, and sharing with a massive audience, because any of those independently are sort of irrelevant. No, they're very relevant, but they're not going to have the impact we need.
Yeah. And education,
And
I've seen the change. I've seen, there is this group now, it's on regenerative tourism, global regenerative tourism group, whatever it's called. These are all former students of UCI who got together and set up this organization to promote regenerative tourism. They've been working in Europe all over the place. These things happen, and these are motors of change. So it's not a theory. We've demonstrated that it can happen.
And this is a final question, and usually leads to other final questions, so bear with me. But if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing overnight, so no longer in charge of the fund, but a magic wand which potentially is more powerful or less powerful, depending how you frame it, what would you change? It could be anything, but only one thing.
I've changed the whole educational system.
I had an idea. Yeah, you were going there.
Yeah, we're working with this Peruvian friend, Joaquin Lejía, who developed a system in Peru where he brings in Mother Nature as a teacher into schools. He moved to Costa Rica to work with me, and we're developing this new center for training teachers from around the world on how to bring nature into schools as a teacher. The impact this has on young kids is amazing. I can see it in my kid. We're living on a farm. He goes out and collects snakes and scorpions and tarantulas and knows how to identify them. He goes out with his mother's cell phone and identifies the birds singing, and then he gets his camera and goes and he is understanding how nature works. He will be one of the future Eduard Müllers because he is understanding the importance of nature in our lives. We need to then move to high school. Is it worthwhile calling soft skills soft when they're the most critical skills that are needed? Is it a technical training that's going to save the planet? No. Kids can learn on YouTube, but they cannot get their soft skills and critical skills from YouTube. You cannot do that. Leadership, we need to move away from competition. And in kindergarten, they already have the student with the best grade or the student who plays the best soccer. No, we need the student who is the best classmate, who helps the other classmates move forward. So we need cooperation instead of competition. In high schools, we need to have students that are able to join in community work and build community-based projects, not individual startups that are going into egoism, but actually collaborating, building a better future. In universities, we cannot keep on teaching kids that we need to put pesticides on the food we're going to eat. We cannot train food technicians who think that putting poisonous colorings into food is good because it will be prettier to eat, even if it's dangerous. We cannot keep on teaching that. So yes, we need to change the educational system. And there is no change in planetary conditions if we do not re-educate the people. And when I started the university, I used a term which I was convinced to quit using it for obvious reasons. I said, I'm going to recycle the professionals that are coming out from traditional universities. Of course, that wasn't a good word to use. But students that go through our programs, they think differently. And that's what we need. We need people to be able to think differently, to understand complexity, to understand that if we go back to nature and use nature, understand nature, and work with nature, we can build a better future. And the biggest mistake we made, and I asked my staff in 1997 not to use the term environmental education. And people thought I was crazy. And I said, no, environmental education has been wrong. We're teaching people that we have to take care of the planet. The planet takes care of itself. If we would have taught people that if nature's not happy, nature's not healthy, nature's not functioning, we don't exist, that would have been a different power structure. So if people would have understood that Descartes was wrong, we cannot separate spirituality from materialism, that Newton was even more wrong because a system does not work by the forces that components exert against each other. In nature, 1 + 1 can be 20. So we can actually go all the way back to the Greeks. I was taught that you need to identify one question, one hypothesis, and the scientific method was to find one answer. That is the worst thing that could have happened to humanity. Because in nature, there are 100 questions and 100 different answers. So this has to change. And the only way to change this is if we work, bring in the spiritual, the consciousness, the Earth Charter principles, understanding of nature, working with nature, and getting nature to function again so we can function again.
I think it's a perfect wrap up of this conversation. I want to thank you so much for joining us here in challenging health moment and time-wise as well, very early morning or early morning for you. And of course, for the work you do and sharing it here with us to share with our audience. I will put a lot of links in the show notes below. If you're interested, please reach out, get in touch, go and visit. I have not done that yet, but I heard amazing stories. So definitely, if you have the means, do that. And thank you so much for joining us here today.
It's been a pleasure. I know you guys that work in communication are probably the most important people right now, because we need this narrative. We need this new narrative. We need to give hope. And it's your audience who can receive this message of hope and join by doing things and not sitting down and waiting for somebody to do them for us.
Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. For the show notes and links we discussed in this episode, check out our website, investinginregenerativeagriculture.com/posts. If you like this episode, why not share it with a friend or give us a rating on Apple Podcasts? That really helps. Thanks again, and see you next time.